He sat upon a throne meant for triumph, and decayed like a forgotten corpse in a tomb. In halls where kings once strode in polished armor, he was carried, a pale figure veiled in linen and incense, held upright not by strength, but by duty, by ritual, and by the terrible knowledge that a kingdom would fall if he did. The air around him trembled with prayer and perfume, not to honor him, but to drown the scent of a sovereign slowly surrendering to rot. Silk robes brushed bones growing sharper beneath thinning flesh. Holy oil clung to skin that no longer felt the world that worshipped it. A crown rested on a brow that could no longer feel its own weight, while the body beneath collapsed in silent rebellion. He did not fall in battle. He did not bend to steel or flame. He was not broken by an enemy outside the walls. His executioner was inside him, patient, methodical, merciless, eating him softly, quietly, stealing sensation, sight, breath, dignity, a king unmade by inches. Still he ruled, still his word shaped armies, still men knelt, not out of pity, but out of awe, for a ruler who stared death in the face and answered with command, not surrender. A monarch who led holy wars while his fingers withered, who held a kingdom together as his own body dissolved, who inspired warriors with a voice that weakened, yet never wavered. Imagine iron resolve trapped in melting flesh. Imagine a child born to a crown, trained to wield sword and scepter, only to find his body hollowing before manhood. Imagine a throne gilded in gold, but stained with the quiet horror of a living martyr who learned too early that power sometimes comes not from strength, but from the refusal to bow to fate. In these sacred halls they did not hide him. They watched him, the nobles, the priests, the soldiers. They watched as a king turned relic, as youth gave way to ruin, as beauty curdled to suffering, and they knew, without him, Jerusalem would tremble, and the world would change. This is not a tale of glory. It is a vigil, a crown held aloft by sheer will, a body betraying a soul forged in fire, a throne that smelled of incense and death where courage rotted and still remained unbroken. This is the story of the king who ruled while his flesh deserted him, the monarch who did not die when he should have, and in living, held back catastrophe until the last fragile breath. Before we go further, if stories like this move you, if you honor those whose voices time tried to silence, tap like and help echoes of time bring forgotten souls back into the light. Jerusalem breathed in golden light, the kind that touches stone and turns it sacred. At dawn, the city did not stir. It awakened, like a lion stretching atop ancient dust. Bells murmured from church towers, their echoes rolling over domes and battlements, into narrow streets where incense drifted and whispered prayers clung to morning air. This was not a peaceful capital. It was a holy wound in the earth, coveted by empires, worshipped by millions, held by steel and scripture in equal measure, a kingdom balanced on faith and fear, where every sunrise could signal salvation or siege. The Crusader states ringed the horizon like fragile beads on a rosary, each one a fortress hoping the next sunrise did not bring a crimson tide from the desert beyond. Merchants spoke in hurried voices. Soldiers tightened belts and sharpened steel before breakfast. And kings bled here, just as surely as saints prayed. Within palace walls, a prince moved through this world of iron and reverence. Baldwin, young, watchful, shaped by tutors and Templars alike. The child of a holy war, he learned letters beside monks and steel beside knights, his days measured in scriptures and sparring drills. A life forged early, as if fate knew there would be no time for boyhood. He watched men in chainmail train beneath palm trees, their swords hissing through dust, their shields catching dawn like mirrors to heaven. He held wooden weapons in unsteady hands, mimicking the rhythm of blades he would one day command. His breath quickened not from fear, but from longing, from a fire born with him. And yet, there was something the soldiers could not train into him, something that lingered like a quiet omen, a stillness beneath his skin, a silence in his nerves, a prince who stood firm when a blow landed, not in bravery alone, but in the terrible hush of a body that did not answer pain. The palace saw it before the people did. Gentle confusion at first, admiration disguised as curiosity. How brave, they murmured, how fearless the boy is. A child of Jerusalem, immune to fear, immune to hurt. But in a world ruled by heaven and blade, gifts could be curses, strength could be warning, and miracles could be masks for horror yet to come. Fate had chosen him, but no one, not the priests, not the knights, not the boy himself, yet understood the price he would pay to wear a crown purchased in blood and sanctity. Jerusalem waited for him as it waits for all its kings, with hope, with suspicion, with the faint scent of foreboding carried on desert winds from lands that did not forgive weakness. Before we continue deeper into his rise, if this world grips you, if these forgotten souls call to you across centuries, tap like and stand with echoes of time so their voices do not vanish into dust. Children bruise easily in a world of stone courtyards and wooden swords. Knees scrape, knuckles split, laughter turns to tears. That is the rhythm of boyhood in a kingdom that trains its sons for war. But Baldwin did not bruise like other boys. He did not flinch when struck in play, did not shout when a training sword caught his wrist, did not cry when he fell against carved limestone and skin split open like parchment. He simply rose, dusted himself off, and continued. To the other children it seemed like bravery. To the knights who watched it looked like promise. A prince without fear, without hesitation, as though God himself had sanctified his nerves. Yet courage has breath. It trembles, it sweats, it winces at pain. What Baldwin showed was something colder. Unnaturally calm, unnaturally still, a boy who felt the world with his eyes and not his flesh, a child who learned pain only through observation, not sensation. At first, only a few noticed. A nursemaid with trembling hands whispering that the child did not react to the pinpricks meant to test fevers. A palace physician watching blood bead on skin without a gasp or tear. A knight pausing when a wooden practice blade struck the prince's cheek, and Baldwin only blinked, confused not by hurt, but by expectation. And then came the quiet test. No ceremony, no audience, only a tutor, a boy, and a creeping dread. The sun rose pale through arched windows. Baldwin sat, hands folded, awaiting scripture instruction. The tutor approached, voice steady but heart tightening inside his ribs, and placed the edge of a needle against the prince's arm. A pause. A breath held. A gentle press. Nothing. No recoil, no flicker of discomfort. Only the boy's eyes, bright and innocent, watching without understanding. The tutor pressed harder. Stillness. Silence. A kingdom's future sitting utterly unaware of the horror blooming beneath his skin. In those days, this was not an ailment to whisper lightly. It was a sentence, a mark of divine wrath or demonic shadow. Those touched by such a fate were cast out, to leper houses beyond city walls, to lives stripped of touch, of family, of dignity. But this was no common child. This was a prince of Jerusalem, a vessel of royal blood and holy expectation. To speak what had been seen would be to condemn the kingdom's hope and stain a sacred line. So the secret stayed locked behind tight lips and frightened eyes. Servants looked a second too long when he walked by. Physicians swallowed questions they dared not voice. And Baldwin, still laughing in sunlight, still chasing wooden swords through gardens, remained blissfully unaware that his destiny had already begun to rot beneath the surface. He could not feel pain, and the world around him began to feel fear in his place. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, comment where you're joining from. Echoes of Time loves seeing our global history family. Death came to the palace quietly, as it so often does among kings. A father gone, a kingdom holding its breath. The holy city did not weep loudly. Jerusalem had seen too much blood to cry like a child. It mourned like an ancient warrior, with bowed heads, whispered psalms, and steel polished for whatever came next. In the shadowed corridors of royal chambers, servants walked softly, Priests moved like specters, their robes brushing mosaic floors, and somewhere among them, a young prince stood still, his face pale not with grief alone, but with the weight of a destiny that had come too soon. 13 years old, a boy in age, yet suddenly a pillar upon which an empire leaned. He had not yet grown into his armor, yet a crown, heavy, ancient, unforgiving, now awaited him. The kingdom gathered, knights in mail and crimson cloaks, clergy bearing relics and relic cases, incense in golden censers curling toward the vaulted ceilings, nobles stiff with pride and fear, robes trembling like leaves in winter wind. At the heart of it all, Baldwin walked forward, not carried yet. He still had strength then. His step was deliberate, as though matching the solemn rhythm of his fate. Eyes ahead, jaw set, hands steady. If the world expected a child, it found instead a soul already tempered by an enemy no one could see. They placed the crown upon him, gold wrought to hold the memory of kings long dead, precious metal warmed by the touch of history. The murmurs rose like a tide. God protect him. God protect us. Because they knew. Whispers slid between marble pillars and candle flames. Some spoke in fear, others in pity, and a few, those with ambition, spoke quietly of contingencies. The physicians who had pressed needles into young flesh shared secret glances. Clergy debated scripture late into the night, searching for a sign. Was this boy chosen or cursed? Was this divine burden or divine punishment? A kingdom's hope or its doom? Some urged isolation, a monarch hidden away behind veils and sanctified chambers, ruling only through counsel, never seen, never touched. Better to confine the disease than risk the realm. Others whispered harsher suggestions, their voices too low to be remembered yet carried by dread. No nation can bear a king who is already dying. But Baldwin listened to none of them. Not the fearful, not the cautious, not even the merciful. His voice was not loud when he spoke, but firm enough to still the room. He would rule in the light, not hide in shadow. This throne was not a gift to him. It was a duty. And duty, he knew, would devour what remained of his body, just as surely as the unseen sickness already had. He accepted it anyway. In choosing that crown, he did not merely become king. He marched willingly toward a fate that would strip him down to bone and memory, for a land that could not survive without him. He chose rule over refuge, honor over mercy, destiny over survival. He chose the crown, knowing it would kill him. And Jerusalem, ancient and unblinking, watched a boy take the first step toward martyrdom. Before we continue into his first tests as king, if you carry respect for those who faced fate unflinching, consider sharing your voice below. Echoes of Time stands on the strength of those who listen and remember. He did not inherit a throne of ceremony. Jerusalem did not grant its kings quiet reigns or gentle years. It demanded warriors, men who could shape destiny with steel and scripture alike. So the boy king went to war. He trained not in private luxury, but beneath the same blistering sun that hardened common soldiers. Chainmail weighed on narrowing shoulders. Leather grips rubbed numb palms raw, yet he tightened his hold as though grasping fate itself. His tutors had once taught him letters and psalms. Now they strapped shields to his arm, bound fingers that could no longer fully obey him, and prayed he might live long enough to matter. Even as sensation fled his grasp, he refused pity. If a hand failed him, he trained the other. If a limb weakened, he strengthened his resolve instead. He wrapped his hands in linen and leather strips, not to hide decay, but to keep a sword from slipping. Every bandage, every knot tied too tight, was a reminder that the body faltered while duty remained. Whispers followed him. Can a king fight if he cannot feel the blade in his hand? Can he lead if wounds do not burn? He answered not with speeches, but with presence. He rode with his knights on morning drills, dust rising in halos around hooves. He marched beside foot soldiers through thorned scrub and bitter cold. He tightened his cloak against wind, not because he felt it, but because they did. Because he would not be seen as less than the men he commanded. And then came the first true test. A raid on the border. Sharp, sudden, savage, the kind that carves truth out of rumors. Baldwin rode at the front, not hidden behind banners but in sight, where arrows sought kings. His horse stamped restless earth, his cloak snapped like a revenant's wings behind him. He did not shake, he did not falter. He lifted his sword with hands that felt nothing, and still he lifted it. When steel rang across shield rims and sand burned beneath iron hooves, his men saw not a boy fighting the inevitable collapse of his body. They saw a king, not by lineage, by will. He held the line when seasoned captains wavered. He advanced when others hesitated. And though blood smeared his gloves and he could not feel the sting, though bruises bloomed unnoticed beneath his armor, he stayed mounted, silent and resolute, a figure of ghost-pale fortitude against the chaos. By dusk, the raiders scattered. Victory, narrow, hard-won, real. That night, soldiers whispered around campfires not of illness, but of iron hidden beneath youth. A king who could not feel pain, yet felt duty deeper than any living man. A boy who had every right to retreat into silk and sanctuary, yet chose dust, sweat, and the front line. They did not pity him. They revered him. And beneath that reverence, fear stirred too, not of his disease, but of what a man might become when pain cannot break him. Even as triumph crowned him, decay crept unseen beneath wrappings and armor, quiet as a viper coiling beneath royal flesh. His legend rose, and with it, his sentence deepened. If Baldwin's courage surprises you so far, drop a like to keep this story reaching more curious minds on echoes of time. The storm did not come in thunder. It came in hooves, in banners blackening the horizon, in the crescent gleam of scimitars rising like a second sunrise over the desert dust. Saladin was moving, not with raiders or probing bands, but with an avalanche of steel and devotion. An army chosen by destiny, convinced God marched beside them. Cities fell silent as news spread. Priests paced sleepless. Mothers pressed trembling hands to children's faces as though memorizing them. Jerusalem braced for the end, and in halls where candles flickered like dying stars, a king who could barely move his fingers summoned every commander still loyal to the cross and crown. The room swirled with fear. Voices cracked between duty and despair. Some urged retreat, others whispered negotiation. A great monarch might bend, they argued, to save the sacred city and the souls within its walls. Baldwin listened, then rose, not on his own strength, but on the arms of those who would follow him even into death. He stood, pale as linen, hands bound in cloth to hide what sickness was claiming. Breath shallow, eyes burning not with fever, but resolve. No fortress will save us, he said. No negotiation will spare us. Jerusalem does not live behind stone. It lives in those who defend it. He would not wait for siege. He would not cower beneath holy domes while the world shattered outside. He would meet fate in open field. Knights gathered in armor blessed at dawn, spurs flashing, faces set like carved saints. They did not march behind a towering ruler of iron and muscle. They rode behind a boy whose skin betrayed him, whose body darkened day by day even as his will blazed brighter than any banner above him. They carried him into the saddle, strapped shield and sword to hands that felt neither weight nor pain. And at the front of that trembling host, monks lifted the relic of the true cross, not a symbol now, but a plea, a promise, and a warning to the heavens. Across the sands, Saladin's army rolled like a tide meant to drown kingdoms. Far more men, far more strength, far more time left in their bodies. The desert wind hissed through grass and banners, and every soldier knew this day would carve itself into history, either as a miracle or a grave. The charge came not from thunderous horns, but from a king too weak to shout, yet mighty enough to move fate. And steel met steel. Sun turned to dust. Battle cries tore the sky open as knights hurled themselves forward, hooves carving earth, spears shattering shield lines, the relic lifted high as though heaven itself were watching. What followed defied logic and numbers. Lines buckled. Warriors sworn to Saladin faltered under the fury of men who refused the grave. A surge, a roar, a blinding clash, and suddenly the impossible happened. The invincible force broke. Victory, not earned, wrestled from doom by a king who should not have stood that morning. Saladin retreated. The desert, moments ago a mouth poised to swallow a kingdom, lay stunned and silent. Around Baldwin, soldiers knelt not in triumph, but in disbelief, as though they feared touching reality would shatter it. Their king did not raise his sword in celebration. He sat still, breath thin, face ashen, as though the very triumph had carved itself out of his life force. Jerusalem was saved that day, but Baldwin paid in coin no mortal should ever spend. The strain had torn deeper into him. Victory had not strengthened him. It had cost him pieces of himself he would never recover. He returned not to feasts, but to chambers where physicians whispered and hope flickered like dying oil. Beneath armor and glory, flesh continued to surrender. A king triumphant, and yet one step further into his slow, devouring night. If Baldwin's courage and defiance move you, share your voice by tapping like, so echoes of time can carry this story to others who still believe history remembers its bravest souls. Victory did not heal him, it hollowed him. The triumph at Montgazar echoed through Christendom, yet in the quiet chambers of Jerusalem's palace, a slower, crueler battle pressed on. One war won, a far more intimate siege tightening, not around walls of stone, but around a body surrendering grain by grain. Blindness crept first as a whisper, a blur where once there had been clarity, faces growing softer, candles smearing into trembling halos. He squinted at parchments, at maps, at men. Then squinting failed him. Letters became shadows. Shadows became haze. Finally, the world dimmed like a cathedral at dusk, until light itself seemed to retreat from him in pity. His hands followed the same merciless path. Fingers stiff, curved unnaturally, flesh loosening from bone like wet cloth sliding from a rusting sword. He tried to grip a quill. It trembled between dead nerves. Ink stained his bandages. Where once his signature sealed judgments and treaties, now scribes leaned forward, receiving whispered commands from a voice grown thin but undiminished in steel. There came a time when speech faltered. Not thought. Never thought. Mind sharp as ever, spirit unbroken, but words crawled instead of marched. A king who had once led armies could now only force syllables through lips that struggled to obey him as faithfully as his soldiers had. Walking became ritualized pain. Legs refusing command, muscles wasting as if time fed on them like wolves. They carried him now, knights, servants, loyal hands beneath royal weight, not as pallbearers, but as warriors lifting their banner, refusing to let it fall while breath remained beneath its cloth. And around him, as his body weakened, the palace thickened with ambition. Faces that once bowed in reverence now calculated inheritance. Voices that praised him began to measure his hours. A kingdom that depended on a dying king began to tremble, not in loyalty, but in hunger. Counselors whispered succession. Generals weighed loyalties like coin. Nobles sharpened smiles sharper than blades, waiting for the final droplet of life to slip from his grasp. Yet he did not yield. When one lord plotted too openly, when another questioned if a king so frail could still rule, they made a fatal mistake. They assumed weakness meant absence. He summoned them, ordered his litter prepared, and as court gathered in a chamber smelling of incense and fear, 2 knights lifted him, a pale sovereign wrapped in linens and dignity, eyes clouded, body failing, but presence sharper than any sword. He entered not as a relic, but as a storm. Silence crashed like iron gates closing. Those who doubted him felt their certainty fracture. He did not stand, he could not, yet he towered over them all, spine straight, jaw set, voice a rasp of command forged harder by suffering. He forced them to kneel, to swear loyalty not to his flesh, but to the authority that outlived flesh, each oath carved from them by a king they had already begun to bury in their minds. And they bowed. All of them. Not because he could wield a sword, but because even dying, he was the sword. Unbreakable until the final breath. Fearless because he had nothing left to fear. A man devoured by his own body, yet still ruling it, and ruling them. If you're still here, you're a true history soul. Consider subscribing. Echoes of Time brings the past back to life every week. The palace dimmed as though the very stones understood what approached. Candles burned low behind shuttered windows, their flames trembling like souls unsure whether to pray for mercy or brace for loss. Baldwin was carried to a chamber set apart from life, a room darkened not only by heavy curtains but by the quiet weight of surrender. No crowds, no courtly eyes, only the hush of servants who had followed him from youth and would not abandon him now. Incense thickened the air, rising in slow, bitter spirals to drown the truth the body could no longer hide. Oil burned in silver bowls, sweet fragrance masking the scent of flesh giving way to the grave before life had finished with it. In that dark, sacred quiet, breathing itself seemed reverent, soft, careful, afraid to disturb what dignity remained. Once he had faced armies under open sky, sunlight burning against armor, sand whipping around his steeled gaze. Now he lay wrapped in linen and shadow, limbs thin as carved ivory, skin pale as holy parchment. A warrior unmade, a king reduced not by defeat, but by devotion paid in blood and bone. His confessor knelt beside him, head bowed, lips trembling through prayers long memorized, voice breaking as though every word cost him a piece of his soul. Loyal servants leaned close to catch whispers slipping from a weakening tongue, carrying commandments as though each syllable might be his last law. He knew what waited when he closed his eyes. Not salvation alone, but collapse. A kingdom balanced on his breath, a city held by his will more than its walls. So before death could steal his authority, he performed one final act of kingship. He summoned the boy who would wear the crown in his place. His nephew, small and solemn, eyes wide with the knowledge that childhood had ended where a crown touched his brow. With trembling hands guided by others, Baldwin consecrated him heir, ensuring no rival could seize power in the moment between life and death. A dying king securing the world with the last thread of strength left to him. He offered not comfort but responsibility, not blessing but burden. A child crowned in the shadow of a fading monarch, inheriting not glory, but struggle. Then Baldwin lay back, eyes clouded yet unafraid, breath thin as prayer. He had fought armies, doubt, fate, and the slow rebellion of his own flesh. Now, battle was over, and in that stillness, he understood what most kings never do, that a throne can be held not by hands or body, but by spirit alone. He departed as he lived, with the world watching not in triumph but in terrible reverence. He died young, and the kingdom shuddered. For those who kept vigil at his side knew the truth the city below had yet to learn. When Baldwin's heart stopped, Jerusalem's began to break. If stories like this stay with you long after the screen fades, consider standing with echoes of time. So the kings and common souls who shaped history are never buried in silence again. The bells tolled not in triumph but in dread. Baldwin's breath faded, and with it, the fragile thread holding a kingdom suspended above ruin. For years his will had been the mortar in Jerusalem's stones, the unseen force binding knight to cause, priest to prayer, noble to reluctant obedience. Without him the palace exhaled, not in mourning, but in quiet, predatory anticipation. Men who once bowed in reverence now leaned forward like wolves scenting blood. His nephew, crowned too young, too fragile, too alone, took the throne. But crowns do not protect children. They devour them. Courtiers circled with soft voices and sharpened smiles, pulling threads of power in opposite directions until authority frayed beneath their fingers. Whispers grew into demands, and loyalty, once anchored to a dying king, drifted like smoke without a fire to cling to. The boy king did not last. A brief flicker of hope extinguished by sickness, by scheming, by the unbearable weight of replacing the irreplaceable. One small coffin, lowered into sacred earth, and silence fell again, deeper, colder, final. Then came another crown, placed not by destiny, but by ambition. A king chosen not by God or courage, but by convenience. Unsteady hands took the scepter Baldwin once held with dying strength, and in their tremor, the world felt the shift. Across deserts and mountains, Saladin watched. He had learned patience in campaigns long before this one, and now, the gate stood unguarded. He marched, not with shock, but with certainty. The same earth that once trembled beneath Baldwin's charge now quaked beneath an empire returning to reclaim its holy jewel. Jerusalem resisted, briefly. Fear does not breed valor, it breeds surrender. Within months, the walls that had watched a boy king rise and fall opened under green banners and relentless faith. A city once held by miracle and martyrdom bowed to inevitability. And yet, even as towers changed banners, and prayers changed tongue, and the holy city breathed a new ruler's incense, one name refused to be buried. Baldwin. Not for victory alone, but for defiance, for ruling while undone by his own flesh, for holding a kingdom through agony and certainty of death, for being the last flame of a flickering dynasty that could not survive without the furnace of his will. Jerusalem fell not when armies breached its walls, but when the heart that upheld it ceased to beat. History does not remember the hands that failed. It remembers the one that held the world together until it crumbled in his grasp. If you feel the weight of these forgotten moments, stand with echoes of time. Where the voices of the past are not allowed to fade. Time moved forward, but his shadow never left the stones of Jerusalem. Baldwin's body was claimed by the earth, yet the memory of his suffering did not rot with him. It lingered. In the silence of chapel vaults, in the brittle edges of parchment where chroniclers carved his name with awe, in the tremor of voices that spoke not of pity, but of reverence. They remembered a king who did not retreat when life deserted him. A sovereign who ruled not because he was whole, but because he refused to break. History often crowns the strong, men who crush, conquer, consume. Baldwin earned his crown by enduring. His flesh failed, but his will never knelt. And so the world did. In crusader halls far from the desert winds, knights spoke of him in low voices as one speaks of martyrs and prophets. In the courts of his enemies, even among those who prayed facing a different holy dawn, respect echoed like a solemn drumbeat. Saladin himself would remember him not as a foe, but as a ruler carved from iron and sorrow. Time is merciless to kingdoms. Walls crumble, banners fade, crowns pass to dust. But some kings are not buried by soil. They are buried in memory, and in that soil they rise again. He became a symbol, not of conquest, but of endurance, of standing upright while the body collapses beneath the weight of destiny, of choosing duty over breath, faith over flesh, and sacrifice over self. And when scholars read the chronicles, when filmmakers chase legends, when storytellers search centuries for a flame that does not go out, they return to him. The boy who felt no pain, the king who felt every burden, a ruler who held an empire together with nothing left but spirit, and died knowing kingdoms fall, but courage does not. He outlived his own body, and in doing so, he outlived death. If this story moved you, comment "Echoes Live On," and subscribe to Echoes of Time so these forgotten voices never fade again.